Tracks in the Snow by M.G. Gallows. 1 year before Death Dealers. A forgotten nightmare startled me awake. My sleeping bag was tucked to my ears against the late September chill. Danica was gone. That wouldn't have bothered me most days. She and her family were the type to rise with the sun. But she'd taken her bedroll. No phone charger, bathroom kit, or discarded clothing. I couldn't smell her delicate perfume or the leather polish for her jacket. The echoes of our fight still rang in my ears. My excuses sounded hollow with the light of day. 4 years of hopeful happiness shattered. I'd expected her reaction, but as I crawled out of the truck, I realized how far she would go to end the relationship. The campground was empty. The Visitory's tiny convoy of trucks and RVs had departed, and nothing remained but tracks in the snow. My breath seized, but I fought down panic with the grim resignation of a man walking to the executioner's chair. I was alone for the first time in years. Breathe, just breathe. The advice fell on deaf ears. I leaned against my truck and slid into the slush. Grief, guilt, and guttural despair washed over me, and I resisted the urge to wail by bashing my head against the truck. Fury and physical pain gave me a buffer, and I vented on the icy steel. Wet snow soaked through my jeans, but I didn't care. What could I do? The Visitory knew the roads of North America better than anyone. I'd been asleep for hours. They could have been halfway to Mexico already. Danica had a phone, but I didn't. I'd never upgraded with the rest of North America. Everyone I cared to talk to had been within arm's reach, and the rest I mailed cards to. I doubted she'd answer if I tried. But to take everyone with her, I thought, the entire clan, and Patty. Losing Patricia almost hurt more than losing Danica. Danica was a lover, albeit a commanding, tumultuous one. But her little sister Patricia was the sibling I'd never had. The nomadic Visitory didn't have schools, so I'd been there, helping her learn how to read and write, watching her grow from a dirty-faced kid to a precocious preteen tomboy who loved arachnids and bugs. She'd been my shadow for years, always lurking nearby no matter where I went, like she could read my mind. She was family when I thought I had none. If anyone had vouched for me, it would have been Patty. She's barely 13. I reminded myself. She wouldn't have had any more clout with the elders than I had. Sorry, kid. The words tasted bitter on my tongue. After a long period of cold and grief, I forced myself into my truck. While I waited for the engine to warm up, I pondered what I would do next. Where would I go? I'd never needed a direction with the Visitory, who chose their path and allowed me to walk it with them. Now I faced the dizzying prospect of finding my own way. I dug my map out of the glove compartment. It marked the history of my travels with little red X's. Towns I'd stayed in, roads I'd traveled from Alberta to Ontario in the first year of my journey, before finding work in Wraith, and then love and comfort, dreams of a future, then howls, blood, fire, screams, and a shudder rippled through me that had nothing to do with the cold, but I cranked the heater. Anyway, I scanned the horizon for any sign of the moon, then shook off the rising fear in my mind. After Wraith, the Visitory had taken me in. We went east to Quebec and the Maritimes, then north into Nunavut and the Northwest Territories, through the Yukon into Alaska, and then down the coast into Washington State. Where Danica figured you out, I thought. But I was across the border in the U.S. I dug my wallet out of my jacket and pulled out the fake ID the clan had helped me get from some guy named Piotr, a local black market contact they had, Russian or Ukrainian. Decent guy for a crook, but then again, I was crooked too. You don't have to be, I thought. That was true. I could toss the ID and return to Canada. The border guard hadn't looked twice when I came south, though that could have had something to do with Danica's mother, Susanna. She had a talent for blurring people's minds, made them forget to notice things. Go home, I shook my head. I hadn't spoken to Mom in 5 or 6 years. No reason to. She had her own family now, My half-brothers were 11 or 12, Patty's age, but I'd be a stranger to them, a drifter from out of the gloom, intruding on their quiet, comfortable lives. I scanned the map, tracing my finger past Seattle to the coast. I'd seen the Great Lakes, the Atlantic, and the Arctic Sea with the Visitory, but I hadn't seen the Pacific yet. Our stop-off to get my ID and supplies from Piotr had been a brief one. The clan was apprehensive about big cities. If it had a population bigger than 20,000, they got skittish. Cultural agoraphobia or something. Well, I'm not with the clan anymore, I reminded myself. The attempt to encourage myself hurt, but I rolled with it. Nothing to stop me from getting lost in a big city for a few days, or longer. I could see how handy the fake ID was, and try to find a job. Away from the roads, away from the wilds, I told myself. Yeah, the clan had magic and strength in modest numbers, but without them, I began to feel on edge. My eyes darted from the sky above for signs of the moon, to the trees all around me. When was the last time Nana Valerie had sensed the unkindled tribes lurking about? Fairbanks? Danica's mother, Susanna, said they didn't like the cities. Too many people, all of them living, eating, and shitting everywhere. Too much noise and light. If I couldn't travel with the hedge witches, a city was the next best thing to keep those animals from sniffing me out after Wraith and recognizing the blood of their kin on my hands. I could spend the winter with a real roof over my head, spring mattresses, hot showers I didn't get from truck stops, a chance to sit still and think about what I wanted from life. After 8 years of wandering, letting the rest of the world pick my course for me. The truck was good and warm by then. I followed the tracks left by the Visitory until I exited the campground. I turned west, blinked away a few tears, and turned the music so loud my brain couldn't concentrate on anything but the road. Under a moody gray overcast, the Pacific looked black. The lightless, briny depths didn't freeze, but my fingers were frigid as I knelt at the shore to touch them. The empty bleakness fit my mood, but I did my best to push the feelings, the memories, aside. You can't take back what happened. Tell it to the part that hurts, I snorted. I was already talking to myself. Not wanting to return to my truck, I parked it at a local coffee shop, bought the biggest, cheapest cup they sold with my limited funds, and took a walk. The northwest part of the city was touristy, far from the industrial parks and docks I'd seen entering the city from the south. North of the river, everything was a little cleaner, fancier, and eager for vacationers with disposable cash. Live theater, indoor and outdoor sports for each season, and every street was lousy with expensive pubs and restaurants. Nothing of it appealed to me or my impoverished wallet, so I kept walking. At the end of the hospitality-rich neighborhoods, I found myself surrounded by upper-class apartment complexes and cloistered gated communities with their own parks and schools. It wasn't the wealthiest part of town that I'd seen, but it was too rich for my blood. Yet I had an inkling to keep walking, to abandon my truck, faithful workhorse since I was a teenager, and vanish into the miasma of faceless humanity before me. Perhaps Danica would come looking, led by her grandmother's gift for divination, only to find my truck long abandoned, left to ponder what became of me. I sigh, shook my head, and turned around. I was turning into a real Prince Whiny. By the time I reached my truck, the traffic had swelled to an intolerable size. My anxiety spiked when I saw so many people. How did city folk handle the day in, day out, grinding each other into paste to work a job they hated? The hedge clans were outsiders, but at least they weren't beholden to anyone else's bottom line. Not that the Visitory were saints or anything. A band of nomads couldn't stay on the road without some kind of money. Every stereotype you ever heard about the Roma, about gypsy thieves or traveling hucksters, was more likely the fault of the Visitory, who shared very distant blood with their Roma cousins. But the cultural differences were wider. The Visitory were mages, for one. A few centuries ago, they had enjoyed a somewhat darker reputation. trading their magic for safe passage through lands other wizards would fear treading. Lands where monsters reigned, like a certain vampire count from Eastern Europe who needed daylight servants. The fall of House Dracul had diminished them, but the stain of their reputation hung over the Roma to the current age. Having lived with the Visitatori for nearly 5 years, I could say that they were impressive thieves, with a network of contacts throughout the continent, from Alaska to Panama. No matter where they went, there were fences to pawn goods off on, and items that needed smuggling across borders. Not exactly lucrative, but it was what kept them afloat as they spent their lives living like fugitives. It bore the question, did they run because they were thieves, or were they thieves because they ran? I'd never been able to figure it out. They'd never been keen to share details of their culture with me, outside of the obvious. It meant sitting out on a lot of their group meetings and only hearing about their rituals and beliefs through the filter of Danica and her need-to-know mentality. Ever faithful to kin and clan first and forever. I had to shake my head to break the reverie. The traffic had moved about 4 feet while I stood there lost in my own thoughts. Rather than try to shoulder my way through it, I picked a cheap-looking fast food diner and nibbled fries, hoping inactivity would help me decide my course when the walk hadn't. But my fingers threatened to tap dents into the table. I told myself I was okay, calm, dealing with the problem, the pain. Every moment that passed was a tick on the clock between the Alex, who'd been part of something, a clan, a family, and the Alex, who had nothing and no one, no direction or place to call his own. The tray with my dinner crashed to the floor with a sweep of my arm. A flurry of eyeballs turned my way, but I did my best to ignore them and tried to steady my hands. There was a tightness in my chest, like a fist around my heart. I forced myself to clean the mess and offered an apologetic but plastic smile to the pimple-faced kid who approached with a dust mop. The sun was setting as I left. The air was cold and damp, promising another shivery night in my sleeping bag. I was so sick of being cold, but what was the alternative? Head south, I thought. Arizona, Nevada, Louisiana. Warm weather sounded appealing. In my 4 years with the Visitatori, we'd traveled the far north of the continent. Winters in Nunavut and Alaska cocooned in my truck with blankets and extra layers. Had pushed the cold tolerance of my proud Canadian heritage to its breaking point. But getting anywhere would require gas and food, and I didn't have a clan of vagabond burglars to help me pilfer it. I was sure life would go swell if I robbed a gas station and got arrested with a fake ID. 5 years without so much as a phone call, and then Mom gets a midnight ring from the Washington State Police. What's the alternative? I thought. Pick a direction. Nothing will heal you but time. I didn't fancy trying another walk to clear my head, but my eyes spotted a metro line entrance. If the city had public transit, it would save me some gas and let me continue brooding somewhere indoors. My truck would be safe enough. Vehicles packed the parking lot, and there were more appealing targets than my rusted-out, 20-year-old rust heap. I considered grabbing the revolver from its box under the driver's seat, but brushed the notion off. There are no wolves in the city, I thought, but I kept an eye out for the moon. When was the next full? Middle of the month. I had time. The underground was much warmer, but there was a toll. The price of a ticket was enough to make me wonder if daily commuters would be better off buying a car. Then again, I didn't pay insurance for my ride. Career crook over here. I gathered with a group of about 20 people to wait for the next train. My feet and hands couldn't stay still. I'd been on a train twice in my life. Once when my mom had taken me to an Old West theme park that had a working, albeit small, train that circled the park. She and I had tried salted licorice, and she'd humored my insistence that I'd seen the ghost of a pale woman staring at me from one of the reconstructed historical buildings we'd passed. The second time was in my teens, a proper train ride out west to take part in a school-sponsored summer camp, when I'd discovered my magic, when I'd traumatized a bully into having a nervous breakdown. The start of a long, dark path. By the time the metro arrived, my mood had soured again, and we herded ourselves into the cars like cattle. Too many moments of my life had been part of that dark path, hurting people in my teens with magic I barely understood. Wandering the roads alone until I tried to settle in Wraith. Blood and fangs, her screams fading into the dark. I gave my head a shake and found a bench to claim. There weren't many people in the train car, and they were all content to mind their own business. I rubbed my face with my hands, trying to keep all the bad thoughts out. The Visitatori were more than a family to take me in. They had been a balm to my trauma, kind faces, and patient words to draw a man out of near catatonic shock. Without them, every memory I had of Wraith and all the fear I'd carried for years was boiling over. The fresh pain of losing the Visitatori only compounded it. How the hell could I take another step forward? No matter what destination I chose, I'd be carrying my pain with me. Healing was a pipe dream compared to the perdition before me. However deserved, I didn't think I had the power to see it through. I was a real goddamn prince of drama. But it hurt too much. Burying it would hurt as much as pouring it out into the open. And who would listen to a poor nobody from nowhere, abandoned by everyone he cared about while he slept in his truck? I folded my arms and closed my eyes. The train stopped every couple of minutes, and a digital, feminine voice announced the station's stop. People got on and off. The monotony of it, the emotionless drizzle of people helped numb my mind, but I was still wiping my eyes every couple of minutes. I imagined myself red-eyed and sullen-faced, wearing the same clothes for a fourth day in a row, looking every bit like the homeless drifter I was. All I needed was a broken toy microphone and an open bag of dry cat food to snack on to look like every other crazy person Metrogoers filmed on their phones. St. Gloria's Hospital, the digital voice announced. The train slowed to a stop, and its doors opened to the smell of sanitizers and chemicals. A handful of people boarded, some sporting injuries dressed in fresh bandages or carrying little brown bags full of prescriptions. The last one on was a towering black man, more than a few inches taller than me. He clutched a hefty sports bag, the kind hockey players keep their sticks in. He picked a spot across the aisle from me, hugged the bag like a beloved dog, and stared at nothing. Call me an imaginative fool, but I believe there's something about a soldier that gives them a stronger presence than others. Military discipline instills focus that ordinary people, so used to wandering in their own thoughts, lack. The man with the bag, tall and straight in his seat, had an intensity that set him apart from the short attention spans of everyone else on the train. His eyes met mine, dark brown and sharp as razors. He took the details of me in with a glance, sniffed, and turned his gaze toward the front of the train like I didn't matter. But he clutched the bag a little closer and was still as a statue. It was almost unnatural, but I couldn't put my finger on why. What was he hauling? A bag full of guns, but he came from a hospital. Maybe he was picking up a friend's sports gear after his friend took a spill, or he was getting treatment himself. I didn't see any injuries, but getting a bruised rib or a sprained wrist wouldn't be too obvious. A big sports bag could hide a lot of stolen goods. But what could he have stolen from a hospital? Pillows, a coat. Something dripped from the corner of the bag. It hit the floor in a tiny red spot. Before he looked my way again, I shifted my gaze to the ceiling and feigned a yawn. The air grew tense. I felt his eyes on me, but I didn't look his way as we passed through Ogden into Dowry. When we hit Dowry, the man stood, ground his heel as he turned, and exited the train in a power walk, brushing people out of his way, to their annoyance. Amidst the tangle of legs, I stared at the drop of blood. A few more scenarios played through my head while my hands twitched on my lap. A choice was being laid out before me, and my brain was weighing its options. Did I want to get involved? What reward was there at the end of that path? Would I catch a serial killer? Or would I look like a creep stalker chasing a guy who got a bit of blood on him, which could have come from anywhere? The last of the passengers filed onto the train. The doors would close any second. I committed myself to letting them close. Whatever was going on, it was none of my business. He wasn't breathing, I realized, motionless, like a corpse. I was on my feet before I could contemplate what any of that meant. The train rolled off without me, and the station plunged into ominous silence. As I headed for the exit, a scuffle of fabric drew my attention. I turned and saw my target slip from the platform into the darkness of the tunnels. What the hell? I walked to the edge of the platform. My brain made more than a few logical arguments against what I was about to do. Nothing was driving me forward but a lethal case of curiosity and grief-stricken, self-destructive recklessness. But that wasn't all. There was something in the air, not a smell or a feeling of pressure. I was comfortable. It had been a while since I'd considered anywhere home, and to feel it standing in an empty metro station was like bumping into a stranger and recognizing them from childhood. I had a longing, not quite a compulsion or an invitation, to find the source of that feeling, which meant following the man with the big bag. Careful with my footing, I dropped onto the narrow pathway between the curved wall of the tunnel and the live track of the metro. One of those rails was electrified, but I couldn't tell which was which. Metal squealed somewhere ahead, and the wind brushed my face. How fast did the metro go? How many trains were there on each track? Trembling hands brushed the cold, smooth steel of a door frame. My fingers followed the edges until I found a doorknob, and it turned in my grip. Could he have taken it? I gave the door a pull, but it held firm. A speck of light appeared that grew into a blinding starburst. Would the engineer see me? Would he be able to slow in time? The light of the station platform was so far away, too far for me to run. I yanked at the door again, pulled with all my might. Panic rushed up my spine, and in sheer desperation I hurled my shoulder into it. The door swung open, and I fell forward, somersaulting onto my back. The metro train glided past me at a languid pace and stopped at the station. If I had remained trapped outside, it still would have missed me by meters. Idiot, I thought. With a groan, I got to my feet. Of course, the door opens away from the train. While I cricked my spine, I contemplated the corridor I'd entered. Narrow concrete walls, lined with pipes, stretched out into the visible distance, lit by dim red auxiliary lighting. I didn't know how far ahead the man with the bag was, but there was no sign of him. Okay, I thought, don't make this a thing where someone finds your lost corpse rotting into the concrete 10 years from now. Go to the end of the corridor, then turn around and put it out of your life. You're not some private eye. I got control over my breathing as I progressed, but after putting one foot in front of the other for 10 minutes, I'd yet to find anything. I passed locked doors, stairwells that descended into unlit darkness, and plenty of warning signs for idiot trespassers like myself. Come on, Alex. Enough bullshit, I thought. Turn yourself around. There's nothing for you to find. I was putting myself at risk chasing a wild notion, all for the sake of distracting myself. Still, a wary sense of disappointment fell over me. I didn't want to return to my empty pickup in an old bedroll to stew over my rock-bottom predicament. As I turned around, the big guy came out of a stairwell and swung the bag at me. He put a lot of muscle behind his swing, and he'd caught me off guard. But whatever was in the bag was too light to do more than surprise me. I grabbed a strap. He grabbed me, and we wrestled each other to the ground. The guy was quick, and his fists were like iron wrapped in leather. 3 quick hits to my face stunned me, and 3 more punched the air from my lungs. As I wheezed like an angry seal, he twisted my left arm to untangle it from his bag. He had some combat training. Against any ordinary civilian or a decent boxer, he would have had me for the 10 count. But I wasn't like anyone else. I hadn't cut my teeth in the military or in an arena. That shattering glass, the sound of her screams as they dragged her away. I let out a primal cry of anger and terror, deafening in the concrete hallway, and fought like my opponent was a wild bear. I slammed fists into his face, jabbed thumbs at his eyes, kicked and snarled. The reprisal put him on the defensive, but he soaked every hit with more grit than I had for his counterattacks. He never made a sound either, never took a breath. Suddenly, he released the bag and landed a final blow that left me dizzy. By the time the corridor stopped spinning, I was alone with his sports bag. I shook the stars from my vision and rolled onto my knees. Blood oozed from my lips and my nose, and I wiped it on my sleeve as I unzipped the bag. A lump of something was inside, wrapped in layers of black plastic. It had an ankle and toes. What the hell had I stumbled into? It wasn't someone stealing kidneys for the black market. Who the hell stole a leg? I would have expected blood bags. Like, if the guy was a vampire or something, I thought. Not all creatures of the night drank blood. Gutted, salted torsos hanging from chains in a cold garage. I gave my head another shake to banish the memory, but I didn't disagree with my own assessment. Stolen flesh only had so many uses, many of them culinary. Reporting the situation to the cops was the right thing to do, and the dumbest. I'd never seen positive results going to the police about my problems. With my fake ID and confusing motives, it would make me a suspect. Besides, if they investigated, they could end up lunch. There were a lot of routes the guy could have fled, but the familiar energy in the air turned me towards the stairwell he'd emerged from. My head was a bit muddled, and I didn't want to get jumped again, so I descended with methodical slowness. When I reached the bottom, my breathing was under control again. The sound of grinding machinery spurred me forward, and I found myself outside of a freight elevator that was descending into the darkness. It reached what I assumed to be the bottom, and the corridor fell silent again. Luck, if you could call it that, gave me a break. I surveyed the small room and spotted an electric camp lantern beside the door. I called the elevator, and it ascended, clanking and groaning the entire way. Okay, I thought. Here goes nothing. The lift was little more than a metal cage, which didn't improve my fear of heights. I climbed aboard and hit the button with a trembling hand. All the way to the bottom of the earth, I thought, deeper than the dead are buried. I told my macabre side to shut up for the time being. I passed more sub-levels, a few of them lit by red auxiliary lights. I wondered how many people had gotten lost in such a place. The lift reached the bottom before I was ready. I disembarked into a short corridor of dark yellow brick, nothing like the concrete tubes above me. The air was dusty and dry, stale but not rotten. A heavy steel door with toxic gas warning labels waited for me. The door didn't have a handle. Had the city used it as some kind of secret dumping ground for waste, or had my quarry posted them to convince the uninvited to take a hike? With no way to open the door, I was out of luck. But I couldn't leave it alone. I rapped on the door 3 times with my knuckles, then returned to the elevator. I was reaching for the button when the door opened. The creaky hinges sounded like an angry beast. Do not take that invitation, I told myself. No one trying to hide would leave the door open. My gut told me they were luring me, either to seal me in or ambush and deal with me on their own terms, their own turf. I went for it anyway. It horrified my sense of reason that I'd rather stick my face into uncertain doom than allow myself to deal with my emotional pain. But Danica was the latest taste of a hurt that I'd been avoiding for most of my life. I could wait. Besides, I wasn't completely unarmed. As I approached the door, I shook the dust off my magic and charged it for a fierce spell. It had been a while since I'd used it. It was the reason I had woken up alone, because the people I cared about feared it. Necromancy, the magic of death. It was mine to command, as obedient as my own hands. And if the man I hunted was what I thought he was, he had so much more to fear from me than Danica did. I pulled the door wide, and, lantern leading, strode through. The space beyond was some kind of old cistern, dotted with brick pillars that arched at the ceiling. The air had an odd combination of smells, including stagnant water and old urine, but the cistern was bone dry. I paused in the doorway. It was stupid to traipse about the place. "You dropped this." I held the bag outward. "I don't know why you wanted it, or hell, I think I do. But if you stole it from a hospital rather than kill someone for it, that tells me you're doing it because you have to." I set the bag down. "I didn't come here to fight. I wanted to know the truth. Maybe we have more in common than you think." A scuff of fabric drew my attention to my left. It was the opening an attacker on my right needed to spring from the shadows. Steel flashed, and I hurled myself backward. I banged against the metal door, and it slammed shut. The blade struck the lantern, and the cistern went dark. With a cry of sheer panic, I tackled my opponent. Instead of the tall black soldier, I hit someone a foot shorter than myself, with a wiry build under his clothes. My arms went around his head and sword arm, and I swung him through the air like an Olympic hammer. My mystery attacker tumbled out of reach, and his blade clattered to the floor. I tried to grab for it, wary of slicing my own flesh, but the big one struck and pushed me off balance. I landed on my back, and he put a boot between my legs. The impact reached the ceiling of my skull, and I let out a pained cry. Too stunned to focus, my attackers ganged up on me and started stomping my head and chest. Pain turned to fury with each blow. I hadn't come to fight. I'd made my peaceful intentions known. Now they were trying to kill me. My magic surged out of my soul, and I unleashed a burst of necrotic fear, something to hit the panic buttons of my attackers. I didn't see the result, but one of them let out a shout and stopped attacking. I pushed to my feet, hit a nearby pillar with my face and shoulder, and swung blindly. The big one took a glancing blow to the jaw. The scrape of metal warned me that my shorter attacker had reclaimed his blade. I grabbed a handful of the big one's clothing and swung him toward the sound, then retreated further into the cistern. In the darkness, silence was imperative, but I sounded like an angry moose with asthma. My attackers barely made a sound, and they knew the layout of the place. A curved sword slid out of the darkness and brushed against my arm. The moment it made contact, the wielder sawed it over my denim jacket, and cold metal sliced through my flesh. Not a deep cut, but it was enough to make me cry out in shock. I missed with a return kick, overreached, and a hard blow to the leg knocked me to my knees. Powerful arms pulled me into a military sleeper hold, exposing my chest and stomach. The big one's accented voice growled near my ear. "Do it." Light filled the cistern, and we were all blinded. As my vision adjusted, I took stock of my second attacker. He was a wiry Japanese guy in a sleeveless shirt and white pants. His sword was raised to disembowel me. The woman's voice spoke out. "Enough, no more fighting." "He followed us," the black guy argued. "He'll bring the police here." "We can't risk it." The Japanese man's voice was cold. He lunged. I let out a roar and unleashed all the magic I had charged. It was shapeless and unfocused, driven by the wild need to lash out at my attackers, for fear of my life. Fog wafted off my fingers and chilled the air. The swordsman tensed, and his elbows and knees squeezed in towards each other. He teetered, off balance, and let out a choked gurgle before snarling something in Japanese. New sensations flooded my mind, like when your foot is asleep and regains its sense of feeling. I could feel the swordsman's body as if it were part of mine. With a savage smile, I clawed at the air with my hand, and he took a few clumsy steps, eyes bulging in terror before slashing at his taller companion. "What are you doing?" The black man released me and withdrew to a safe distance. The swordsman caught himself with a shudder. The connection to his body faded as my concentration broke. I flexed my fist and reasserted it, and he started swinging the sword in clumsy arcs. "I didn't come here to fight," I snarled, "but that doesn't mean I came here to die." The woman with the lantern approached with her hands raised. To my confusion, she wore a starched shirt and long skirt with her hair done in a beehive. like every mom in every sitcom from the 60s. Please, no more fighting. I hesitated, but didn't release the swordsman. He rocked on his heels while his companion looked on in shock. "How are you doing this?" he asked. Magic. A wave of dizziness hit me, and I shook my head. I was wasting too much power on my inadvertent spell. The Visitori had warned me about it. Magic comes from a renewable source, the soul, but mages only had so much of it to draw on. Precise use of that power, like pouring measured amounts from a cup, was the key, but that level of discipline was impossible for me in a fight. I was tossing buckets of it left and right. The woman took another step. "We're only defending ourselves." He wasn't. I gestured at the Japanese man with my chin. He glared at me, muttering promises in his native tongue. The woman got between me and him. "Let him go. I swear I won't let him attack again." "Deb," the big one warned. "Enough, Norton," said Deb. She lowered her arms. I took a second longer to pretend I was considering it and let him go. As the sensation of his flesh in my mind fell away, exhaustion fell over my shoulders like a heavy weight. One fight, and you're on the edge of spell fatigue, I thought, like I was a teenager all over again. I hoped the wariness didn't show as I got to my feet and resisted the urge to hold my cut arm like a child. The swordsman shuddered, squeezed his hand in front of him, and fixed me with a murderous look. "Ichiro, take a step back," Deb said. She looked like a homemaker, but carried herself like a squad corporal. Ichiro snorted and turned away like it didn't matter anymore. Instead, he licked my blood off his blade. From his smile, something about the vintage agreed with him. "My name is Deborah St. Germain," she said. I guess I'm the leader here. This is the Gallows. It's our refuge, where we try to hide from. Well, I'm sure you already know why we hide." I gave my neck and shoulder a roll. "Sure, you're hiding from the living." Deb nodded. "You're the first to find the Gallows in 40 years who wasn't already dead. And I'm guessing you're also, what term do you prefer? A wizard?" Ichiro looked my way. Norton nodded, putting the facts together. "Told you he wasn't normal," Ichiro said. He spoke to the open air to his left, as if someone were there next to him. "Mage will do," I answered Deb. "Necromancer, if you're nasty." Again, the two men exchanged glances. Ichiro laughed. Deb nodded. "We've never met one of your kind, though my predecessor had." "Predecessor?" I asked. "The one who made you?" "No," Deb said. "He founded this place. Artemis Lindquist was his name. He was a hawkeye like the rest of us, but he didn't make us. Some of us are victims of god-awful luck. Others were cursed by someone or something that never took responsibility for us." "Hogby," I repeated. I combed my lackluster knowledge of undead myths, drawn from simple internet searches, and a few books written by people more concerned with the occult as a topic of popular culture than as a serious study. Like a Draugr, warriors bound to their graves. Deb smiled. "Very close, though Draugr are more dangerous, I'm told. Hogby is the Norse word for one of the most primitive forms of undeath. Something born from crude forms of magic and later shaped into a tool for mages like yourself. Mr. Lindquist found evidence of our kind as far back as the pyramids. He believed we were used to guard tombs, protect the resting places of kings, abandoned to watch over someone's gold for all time." "Barrow Wights," I said, like from Tolkien, "men of the graves." "I've never read him," she said with a smirk, "though Henry, our resident bookworm, has." I frowned. "There are more of you." Deb nodded. "There were more once. Some moved on or passed on. I'm the oldest one still here. I was here when the Gallows was founded, around the time Mr. Carter was president." "That explains a few things," I said, like the classical look. "Or are you dressed for guests?" "It helps my sense of normalcy." She smoothed her skirt a bit, then shook her head. "The people here don't want trouble. We don't want to hurt anyone. We only want to be left alone." I tilted my head. That's awful charitable of you. What with the cannibalism and all? It's not something any of us relish. She gestured towards the doorway I'd come in through. Above the awning, carved into the old dark brick, was a phrase, like one of the 10 Commandments for zombies. We do not eat the living. Mr. Lindquist taught us many things about our condition, she said. He spent hundreds of years studying it, trying to understand it. He showed us how to survive, how to get what we need without hurting people. It's our oldest and most important rule. Any who break it are destroyed. I glanced at the sports bag on the floor, the hospital, and other places, Norton said. We can't do it often. What we have there will have to last us months to avoid drawing attention. Months? Between the lot of you? I ask. How often do you have to eat? Staying close to our grave soil slows the hunger, Deb explained. Though you can imagine it's hard to get around when you're hauling buckets of dirt everywhere. I rubbed my jaw, trying to process everything. My wounded arm stung, but the bleeding had stopped. The whites watched me from a distance. I could see the tension in their movements. How many more were living in the Gallows? 5, a dozen. My eyes fell over the sports bag, eating rotten scraps. Did they pass it around like a bong or slice it into sandwich meat? The macabre notion sounded ridiculous, but the reality was just tragic. Now that you've found us, Deb said, what do you plan to do with us? I met her eyes. Do with you. I didn't have a plan. I saw him. I pointed at Norton and realized something was off. There was something in the air, familiar magic. I followed it to its source. A sigh escaped my throat, and I leaned against a pillar. I had nothing better to do. Norton curved an eyebrow. You followed me because you were bored? I shrugged and rubbed my temples. It wasn't like I could turn them into the cops, or the magic cops. What the heck did Danica's mother, Susanna, call them? Keepers. Magic cops for that organization. They were bad-mouthing a few years ago. The something society. Would you like me to look at that? Deb asked. She gestured at my arm. I look at the wound, just a graze. Please, Deb said. I have medical supplies. We don't use them often since eating helps restore us. Resets the clock. Ichiro piped in. Then to his left, he said, do we care? It won't take a moment, Deb said, and you look like you could use a chance to sit and think. I considered her offer, weighing the possibility that I was walking into another trap, poisoned tea, or another gang of whites waiting in the darkness. I wasn't sure Deb was the type, though. She carried herself with enough authority to give 2 combat-trained men pause, but her clothes and polite manner of speaking suggested a more matronly or maternal role. Okay, Deb, I said, lead on. She turned to Ichiro and Norton and hushed their disproving whispers with a look. This way, she said to me. We didn't go far. There were side passages along the walls of the cistern, accessed via catwalks. The nearest to the exit opened into a supply closet, converted into a quaint little cabin. It had a small cot, a table with wooden chairs, and a weathered old rocker. A mountain of stitching and sewing equipment sat in plastic tubs next to it. Deb set the lantern on the table. Forgive the mess, she said. We have few creature comforts and electricity is minimal. You get a lot of knitting done, I asked. She sighed. Our options are limited. I try to organize activities. Game nights and board games, that sort of thing. The older whites humor me, but the younger ones are into video games and the internet. Sports and bar hopping. Nothing we can offer them. You never leave, I ask. She clasped her hands on the table. No, not that some of us haven't tried. A few hours here and there usually for necessities. Norton has picked up much of my slack in keeping the residents contained. He makes as many trips to the surface as he can, but the rules of the Gallows minimize our exposure to the people who could get hurt. Is your hunger that strong? I ask. Her eyes looked hollow. No, but like someone who drinks or smokes too much. We can get accustomed to indulging, even if we don't have to. You mean like an addiction? She gestured to a battered picnic cooler under her cot. Yes, The more we're away from our grave soil, the stronger the hunger gets. Since we have little to feed it, we need to stay put. What about your relatives, friends and family? I ask. She offered a sad smile and produced a metal first aid kit from a dresser drawer. My husband, God rest him, was fortunate enough to pass on from the curse that affected us. As for my sons, well, they buried me. To expose myself to them after that would be unthinkable. It's been, well, I honestly don't know if they're still alive. She blinked, and what looked like black ink rolled down her cheek. Are you okay? I ask. She plucked a bit of tissue paper from a porcelain duck on the table. Tears. Mr. Lindquist said all undead have black tears, though he never discerned why. Perhaps just to remind us that we're not human. I click my teeth. I wouldn't put it like that. But what about the younger people here? Do they have trouble being away from their families? Yes, Deb said with a nod. Our older residents have already lived what you could consider a full life. But we have 6 young whites here that were barely into their 20s when they changed. Miguel and his sister Jimena have one another, and if you meet them, I ask you to be gentle with Jimena. She suffers from terrible anxiety. There's also Donnie, Frankie, Jeb, and Max. They were friends in life and only changed last year. It hasn't been easy for them to let go of their old lives and to leave their families, uncertain what happened. Where are they? I ask. In their rooms, Deb said. Norton and Ichiro take turns watching everyone, and we think Donnie has been trying to find routes out of here that we can't detect. I know it sounds like we're holding them captive, but the hunger, I said with a nod. All it would take is one bite, and some innocent soul could be hurt or killed. I refuse to allow myself or those here to commit such an act. We are dead. We matter far, far less than the living. There was conviction in her tone and pain, but I thought I understood her. Either they starve slowly in complete isolation or risk someone dying when they made a mistake. It wasn't a matter of losing control. There wasn't a switch that turned them into monsters. No, the hunger sounded more insidious. It would gnaw at them under their skin, an itch that refused to be scratched. That kind of restlessness can change a person all on its own, make bad decisions easier when you know it'll bring some relief. It isn't the curse that chooses. Deb's kit looked almost as old as me, but the masochistic part of my brain remembered the sizzle of hydrogen peroxide on my knees as a kid, and I smiled as I tanked it like a champ. You're lucky, she explained. That little sword of Ichiro's can go right through an arm if he swings hard enough. I don't doubt it, I said. I noticed the tattoos and the missing pinkies. He doesn't talk about it, but I do know something about the Yakuza, Deb said. Norton doesn't discuss his history either, but he mentioned growing up in the Congo. There's something about the Gallows that drew us to one another, a sense of belonging. Maybe you're right. Had that comfortable presence called to me too, brought me somewhere my necromancy would be accepted rather than shunned. I shook my head. I didn't fear the whites, but I didn't share their condition. Their home wasn't mine. After sterilizing the wound, Deb bandaged it. You still haven't told me your name, not that I'm prying. I know nothing about mages. I examined her work to think of an answer. It's not something you can learn from a book, but I know the basics. Names are symbols, and symbols have power, but I've never met a mage who can use a name against someone. Like a fingerprint or a mage mark, or an eyeball. It's unique to you. I see, she smiled. You're just shy then? You may be right. My name is Alex. I pause. Cross was the surname I gave the Visitori. It would have done fine, but it wasn't the name on my new fake ID. Danica was too upset to learn it. It was fitting that I embraced it. Alex Fossor, I said. I don't want to sully my mother's good name, so I stopped using my real surname years ago. Deb tilted her head in thought, then smiled. I see. It's nice to meet you, Alex. Likewise, Mrs. St. Germain. She clucked. Heavens, how long has it been since anyone has called me that? Thank you, but Deb will do fine. It spares me a reminder of how old I am. If I may ask, how old are you? The corner of her mouth twitched into a smile. I was born in 1925. I died in 66. I'll let you do the math. I bet you still get asked for ID at the liquor store, I said. Her cluck turned into a crow, polite and charming. It's a rarity among men these days. But oh, who am I fooling? It was a rarity then, too. I smiled. If I can ask, how did you die? Deb hesitated, then gestured at a set of well-framed photos, black and white, hanging from a corkboard against the wall. Do you see the gentleman with the unfortunate ears? I spotted the man in question, a square-jawed soldier with a pair of radar dishes holding his peaked cap up. Good-looking boy. Deb nodded. George St. Germain was a lout in his youth. When he shipped out for the Second World War, he was bragging about the glories he'd bring home from Europe. By the time the war was over, he'd watched so many men die, he couldn't bring himself to hate anyone. Not foreigners, not Negroes. Excuse me, African Americans. Not the weak, not the poor. The bully who had pulled my pigtails and hurled mud at my Sunday dress couldn't muster the anger to curse if he hit his thumb with a hammer. It shocked me to my core when he asked me to marry him, but he was a superb dancer. She squeezed her hands on her lap. Despite his newfound outlook, he went back to Korea and then Vietnam. By then, he was a much older man. Too old, I argued. But he said, if I can keep even one young fool from losing his head over there, then it's my duty to make sure he comes home. I think he was worried they'd draft our sons, if it came to it. So he went, and I am very proud to say not one soldier of his squad lost their life under his command. Deb stood and took a picture. I was so relieved the day he came home. But he'd brought something with him. Something he'd taken from an old Khmeri shrine there. I never got the full story, and I don't think he knew it was dangerous. But a few days after he got home, we were both so sick we couldn't get out of bed or call for help. Our sons were only just in their 20s, but in those days they were grown men and had moved out. They never knew what was happening until... With a trembling hand, she set the picture on the table and sank into her seat. I woke 2 weeks later in my grave. I can't remember how long I screamed for help, but it took days for me to get out. I can't even imagine what becomes of hogby trapped in metal coffins. Deb took a bit of tissue from the porcelain duck and wiped her eyes. I won't burden you with the details. My husband was spared our condition, but it was a long and frightening period of my life. Realizing what I was hungry for, and that I needed to stay near my grave soil, knowing I could never face my sons again after what had happened. If I weren't a Catholic, I may have ended myself sooner. But I have tried to stay strong for George's sake, and for those here in the Gallows who are suffering similar afflictions. I don't know if I'm a monster or cursed, but I pray every day that I will someday see my loved ones again, and they can forgive me for what I've done. Deb wiped her tears with as much dignity as she could muster. I noted how the inky black blotches on her tissue paper faded, like old bruises, into nothing as they dried. Whatever was in their tears, it didn't leave a stain. Coming from a Catholic background myself, I couldn't ignore the feeling that Deb had offered a confession. I didn't depend on her authority and strength, so she could afford to be more honest with her feelings. It wasn't like she could visit a priest. I let her cry for a moment, and my eyes roamed the room until it settled on a small wooden crucifix set above the corkboard. You aren't a monster, Deb, I said. My gut crawled with the revulsion of long repressed memories. Fire, howls, and fading screams. I've seen monsters. Let them try to argue it. I know the truth. She took a steadying breath. I'm sorry we reacted the way we did, but we have so little contact with the world. You're the first to find us, a small miracle that has kept us all safe. But you must understand how dangerous it is for us to reach out to someone. I thought about the Visitory and how they avoided anyone who weren't fellow hedge witches. How extreme they could be about being unnoticed. Ordinary people didn't always react well to having their worldviews shattered in such ways. It's one thing to believe in Santa Claus, another to see the old Fae in action. To keep that kind of power out of common knowledge would require a lot of paranoia and mistrust. They don't have anyone, I thought. I'm not the type to make trouble for people just trying to get by in life, I said. If you want me to go, I'll go, and never bother you again. But maybe I can help. She frowned. How? I won't lie to you about having some magical solution to your problem, I said. I am a necromancer, but I'm as young as I look, and I don't have a lot of experience. But I can do other things. Help you get things. Like what? Anything, I said. I don't mean robbing graves or hunting people or anything like that, but getting stuff. I looked around the small room. Something like, I don't know, food or clothes, a generator or something, so you don't have to sit in the dark day and night. Books, name something. I can help you get it. Deb shook her head. No, that would be. We can't take the risk of... Of what? I asked. Being dead doesn't mean you have to be miserable, Deb. You don't have to live like penitent monks. You can be responsible and comfortable at the same time. Complacency begets carelessness, she said. And misery begets resentment, I countered. I'm not talking about letting your people run around scot-free. But what if we made the gallows more like a home than a prison? She flinched, but a thoughtful smile touched her face. As a homemaker, that's a bit on the nose. Sorry, I said, but I see you sitting here in the dark, holding on with everything you have. Suffering is the point for some, sure, but for others, you said the younger ones are having trouble adjusting. We can't cure their condition, but they can live a semblance of a normal life. How? She asked. Buying them clothes or some video games won't improve their lot. But it's a start, I said, an investment. So they don't have to watch their existence pass them by. And maybe there's some way we can get you more meat. No, Deb said. I won't humor any notion of the sort. Of course not, I said. But there could be a source that you haven't considered. The words stumbled out of my mouth faster than I could rein them in. What was I doing? One sob story, and I was ready to put myself in danger for people I had just met. But I looked around the cramped room full of the scraps of life, the shreds of humanity, whatever horrible curse hung over them. They were people. People like me who had lost everything to true monsters and his own damnable mistakes. It was the sympathy of the visitory, their compassion when they had no reason to give it, that had made me whole again. I was a necromancer. They were undead. I had a reason to show compassion. I'm not saying I have all the solutions, I said, but I'm saying that if you need help, if I can do something, I want to try. Deb held my gaze. I could imagine her ordeal, both before and after her death, the inner strength it took to survive her condition, to endure decades of heartache and loss, and still reach out to others. Whether or not you're sincere, you have to admit this situation has been extraordinary, she said. Deciding now would be rash of me. I stuck my hands in my pockets. If you need a day, then you've got it. The witches I was with, they've moved on. It wasn't my choice, but it was the consequence of my actions. I have nothing but time, but I'd like to at least be useful to someone. She rose to her feet, but despite our height difference, she became my equal. So what can you offer us, outside of uncommon tolerance and emotional support? I know someone here in the city, a black market type. If you have money, he can set you up. He's good at getting the things people can't find elsewhere. Even skilled criminals have trails, Deb said. One person saying the wrong thing leads the police here. Then we become monsters to the public and curiosities that scientists pick apart. I know how to be careful, I said. I've lived the past 4 years off the grid, like you, on the road. She licked her lips. And your contact, what kind of criminal is he? I don't know him personally, but he's a decent sort. For a crook, I promised. Just business. No questions. Treat him fair. Try not to haggle, and he'll get you almost anything. Her brow furrowed. I don't know. Then talk to your people, I said. I'll be back tomorrow. Deb glanced at the door, and a disappointed frown softened into a resigned smile. I suspect they already have something to say about it. She opened the door, revealing a small crowd of people gathered at the bottom of the short metal stairs. They all started talking at once. As they did, I tried to commit faces to memory. Norton, Ichiro, an older man with a potbelly, another with frazzled white hair, a wrinkled senior with thick glasses and an old leather-bound book in hand, a young Latin American man in a Hawaiian shirt, and four college white boys who stood apart from the rest of the group. One at a time, Deb called. When they fell quiet, she continued. I know how you feel. Part of me feels the same, but we can't rush into these things. What are you? One of the college boys spoke to me. He wasn't the tallest, but he was built. A football player, not a ranch hand like me. A necromancer, I said. The magic that messes with death, the kind that made folks like you. How do we cure it? One of his buddies, a redhead, asked. I glanced at Deb. She gave me the slightest shake of her head. There isn't a cure, I said. You don't have a disease. It's not some virus you're carrying. The magic changed what you are. Took you over the edge of death, then left you hanging there. I'm sad to say, it can't be reversed. Technically, I didn't know that for sure, but I didn't want to promise something I couldn't deliver. The redhead's face crumpled into anguish and anger. The tallest of the four, a skinny office intern type, put a hand on his shoulder, but the redhead twisted his torso away from him. I'm not offering miracles and magic solutions. I took a step forward, but I can help in other ways. It won't be all at once, but if you're willing, we can improve things. Make it easier on all of you. We didn't know. Ichiro scratched his neck. This place ain't so bad. Speak for yourself and your imaginary friend, the jock of the four college boys said. It's bad enough I can't talk to my folks, but we have nothing down here. We don't even have toilets. It's like a concentration camp. Donnie, relax a little. The tall intern sighed. I've had a few ideas how we can work those problems out, the white with frazzled white hair said. The main drainage pipe over our heads connects to the upper levels of the sewers. If we opened the right pipes, we could have at least one working toilet. And I could siphon cable and electricity from the streets above with enough cable. We'd have to ration it, so they don't detect the power spike, but it's a start. Then I'll tell you what, I said. Get a list together, and if you've got any money, let's pool it. I can go to someone I know, and we'll get as much as we can. You want us to hand over our money and trust you'll get it done? Norton asked. One of you can come with me, I said. Norton, you've been above. We don't like anyone being alone with someone who can take control of our brains, Ichiro said. He couldn't quite keep the growl out of his tone. We'll go, Donnie said. All of us. Out of the question, Deb insisted. Especially for you. Donnie, I know you and your friends have it the worst. But showing your face on the surface could draw the authorities. You don't know that, the redhead said. Why the fuck do we have to do what you tell us? Because it's what's right for everyone, Norton roared. For us and the people above. Easy for you to say everyone you knew is dead, the redhead snapped. The crowd broke into deafening shouts in the cistern. I couldn't make out what they were saying, though I suspected it was a common schism among them. Those who had no ties to the living and those who did. Deb was shouting over them all, trying to scold those who spoke out of turn and get everyone to be silent. I was sure, given enough time, she would bring the crowd under control. She had been running the Gallows for longer than I'd been alive, if her story was accurate. But there was more at stake now than her own leadership. The Gallows saw me as an outsider and a source of upheaval. I had to flex my strength to show that they couldn't exploit me or use my presence to subvert her. So I summoned the magic I'd used on Ichiro and cast it on all of them at once. It wasn't much, an involuntary clattering of teeth, but their eyes turned on me and they saw the fog wafting off my skin. Listen carefully. I took another step to steady myself. After casting so much magic, the room was starting to spin. I'm not here to offer you freedom. I agree with Deb. Isolation is the best option. So get it out of your heads now that I'm going to skirt her rules. If we do this, we do it smart. We focus on necessities, and you can expect me to be a real son of a bitch for things she decides are contraband. If you can't handle that, I walk right now, and you can go back to squatting over a hole by candlelight. The atmosphere of the gallows was silent and tense. Eyes that had been curious now regarded me with fearful suspicion. Deb looked unsettled, and why not? Losing control of your body to an outside will is an alien feeling to human beings. Of course, if they all turned on me, I wasn't sure I could manage a second cast. Besides, the drain on my magic, being wired into almost a dozen extra nervous systems, was causing the mother of all headaches to blossom. We'll sleep on things and make our decision in the morning, Deb said. We've had more than enough excitement for one night. Ichiro Norton, please show Mr. Fossor the way to the surface. Alex will have our answer for you by then. I had the distinct impression that I was being dismissed or escorted away under guard. But I didn't bother to argue it. I followed the two to the exit and stared at the words written into the brick as I passed under them. We do not eat the living. When we boarded the freight elevator, I kept my back to the wall and Ichiro noticed with a smirk. I didn't begrudge Deb's decision to cut the town meeting short. She needed to have her own show of control after what I'd pulled. I pondered how bad I'd screwed up. The hypocrisy of shaking them all to their core after promising otherwise. There was a chance the whites would be gone tomorrow. It wouldn't surprise me if Deb had some kind of alternative hideout they could retreat to if their sanctuary was compromised. Leadership. The words were in Danica's voice. You don't have an ounce, Alex. I hadn't considered that a bad thing once, but her words hit me in a new way. A leader would make decisions that helped the group. I couldn't even do that for myself. When we left the elevator, Norton put a hand on my shoulder and he pointed to the ceiling. Look here. See the arrows? There were markings on the pipes. Follow them and they will guide you to our refuge. I watched the arrows as we took a route I knew wouldn't return me to the metro station. Instead, we ascended stairs through some kind of big automated power plant or ventilation system and emerged into a snowy alley on Dowry Street. The skies were a dark pink color from the city's lights on the winter overcast. It felt like I hadn't seen a sky in years. The subway is that way, Norton said. Go to the end of the alley, turn right and walk to the petrol station. You will see it. I considered the building we'd emerged from. It looked like all the other townhouses in the neighborhood. Fine, I'll be here before noon. We'll be waiting here for you, Norton promised. He stepped into the building, leaving the door open a crack. Don't be late, Ichiro said. Hey, Ichiro, I flinched. Sorry for messing with your head. He shrugged, that smile of his never wavering. We did try to kill you. They left me alone in the alley. The fresh snow on ground was untouched. The city was quiet. So what happened next? Was I ready to commit myself to being some kind of middleman for the undead, to get them whatever they needed? I didn't see a future in it. Hell, I hadn't asked for compensation. So what was I hoping to get out of it? The alternative was walking away, leave the gallows to their unlife and make my own way. It would mean a long time with my thoughts, lamenting over all those decisions that had brought me to that point in my life. And I would abandon them, like I had been. I rubbed my temples, longing for sleep and relief from the growing pain behind my eyes. I adjusted my coat to cover my injury and started walking. I didn't have a path yet, but the route didn't matter, nor the destination. Going forward was all I had, but it had carried me from Alberta to Wraith, to the Visitory, and to the Gallows. If I kept one foot in front of the other, if I kept walking, maybe someday I'd outrun the pain. Maybe. I fetched my truck from the northeast end and found my way back to Dowry Street an hour or two later. To avoid patrols, I parked in the alley near the false home the whites were using to get below the city. When it pumped a column of steam into the air, I realized the building was a vent station for the subway, exchanging air from the tunnels below. Exhausted as I was, I stayed awake most of the night, watching the steam clouds and wondering if I had made the right decision to help the whites. Was it compassion that drove me, or was I desperate for something to distract me from my grief? I was afraid of having to make my own decisions. Hell, I was almost 27 and spending another night shivering in my truck. There was plenty of evidence that I couldn't take care of myself. But what other choice was there? The whites hadn't chosen to be what they were, and being stuck in a dark, forgotten sewer felt like a fate worse than anything I could inflict on myself. They looked like they could use a leg up, and if I could offer it, was that the wrong choice to make? At some point I drifted off. Sleep brought dreams filled with forgotten memories. Don't just stand there. I'm not carrying you inside like a potato. I crossed the threshold into Nana Valerie's tiny truck camper. The interior was a hoarder's dream, filled with random objects and knickknacks, arranged almost like a store display. Keychains, kids' meal toys, jars of coins, and guitar picks. If it fit in a pocket, Valerie had a dozen or more. The matron herself was 117, though she looked like a frail woman in her late 30s. Longevity, I'd learned, was one of the few commonalities among mages, but polio had withered Valerie's body some 6 or 7 decades prior. The Visitatori didn't have the best healthcare options, and polio had been new. Finally came around and started talking. Have we? Valerie flicked her cigarette and hefted a kettle onto a hot plate with one trembling finger, the only digit that still worked on her right hand. Need help. My voice was dry, hoarse. Valerie wasn't wrong. I hadn't said a word in almost 3 months. Valerie snorted. Don't be a butthead. I get enough people treading eggshells around me. I sighed. Sorry. I'm not one to mince words, Alexander. Believe me when I say I know more than you think I do. You know why you're here. You've had your time to grieve, and now we decide what to do with you. I grimaced but said nothing. She'd know what I was going to say anyway, right? She smiled. Damn right, I do. Not as dumb as you look, but you do a decent job pretending it. A rarity to see one so afraid of his own talents. Most folks your age would champ at the bit to show off their power, but you've got some guilt. Her voice dropped an octave. A death crafter, is it? What? She stared at me. You're a necromancer. All magic is a representation of the soul. The shape it takes reflects who we are. Something to do with how we develop mentally. That power you wield to make others afraid. You're scratching at a deep iceberg. Son, deathcraft is a dangerous branch, but you know that already. You know the power death holds over us all, ever since you found that drowned pup all those years ago. I blinked, feeling sudden tears in my eyes. Valerie held up a hand. I know the awful truth of loss. No one knew it needed help. Where is the fairness of it? Where is God when such an innocent thing would suffer and die alone, so young, scared you away from the water? She blinked, as if surprised. I see. See what? I wiped my cheek. Valerie's kettle whistled. She turned off the hot plate, shifted in her big cushiony chair, and faced me. You're an odd breed, Alexander, for many reasons. A woman of my talent knows patterns when she sees them, even if she can't tell the forest from the trees, so to speak. I don't believe in providence any more than you do, and you're right too. Choice carries us, chance changes us. But I can't help but sense a shadow or two marking your compass. She winced, rubbed her eyes, and sighed. Never mind. It's hard not to sound so damn dramatic when you have my craft, and I've lived long enough to see it all for bullshit. Confused, and not sure what to do, I waited. Valerie smiled. Smarter than you know. Oh, to live to see that end, she shrugged. You're looking for something, a place to belong. You've always stood apart and not without reason. But I won't patronize you with platitudes. Life has been hard on you, and it will continue to do so. I can promise you this much. in the hope it steers you in the right direction. You may travel with us for a time. How long depends on many factors. But I feel that if you do, you'll find that spot for you, the U-shaped hole you're looking for. All right, I said. She nodded. I know you can pull your weight, and the clan will trust my judgment. But tell them you're a fear crafter. Susanna and Danica have a painful history with necromancy. Keep it under your skirts. I frowned and nodded. I was used to keeping my magic a secret. I doubted I'd ever use it, even among the visitory. She tapped her nose. That'll do. Go on now, you're wasting my warm air. I clambered out of the camper into the cool dusk of early April. The visitory had set camp somewhere in Nova Scotia, but I couldn't recall the name of the nearby town. Campers, minivans, and trucks circled a fair-sized bonfire, and the clan was bringing out music and drink to celebrate another winter conquered. I returned to my truck, apart from the others, and sat on the tailgate of my truck. Away from the celebration, the campground felt eerily quiet. I stared at nothing, but my senses were wary of signs of danger. Movement from the tree line, animal eyes illuminated by the fire, or maybe the stink of blood or musk. I checked the moon to remind myself it was a waxing quarter. Footsteps, light, human, approached the truck. A familiar kid approached with her blonde hair pulled into sloppy pigtails. She wore a pair of faded denim coveralls that ended a few inches above her ankles, and one of her shoes had a hole for her big toe. Her green eyes were the color of milky jade.
"Hi,"
she said.
"Hi, Alex."
Patricia Visitori made a point to say hello every day. The only one in the group who noticed I was around. I blinked a reply, but didn't take my eyes off the tree line. She glanced in the direction I was looking and wiped her nose on her sleeve.
"Can I sit down?"
I shrugged. It wasn't my campground. She circled around to sit on the tailgate with me, letting her feet dangle off the ground. "I don't like sitting with the others either," she said. "Whenever we have a bonfire, Uncle Trent gets his guitar, and he sings like tires squealing." The gossipy joke hung unanswered between us. Patty kicked her legs. I watched the forest. "You scared they'll follow you?" "Who?" I asked. "The bad man," Patty answered. She stopped kicking her legs, and her voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "The Wolfmans." I sucked in a breath and shuddered. The word came with a shot of adrenaline. Shouldn't I be? Grandma Valerie is smart, you know. She sees stuff. She knows when something bad is coming. "She doesn't know everything," I growled. "Didn't come fast enough." Patty leaned her head so she could look me in the eye. "You mean to the farm we found you at?" I took another snort of air, and my fingers tightened around the lip of the tailgate. "You should go sit with your family." She stared at her feet. "I'm sorry. We can do magic, but we're scared. Most of us can shoot a gun, but only a few of the grown-ups have dangerous magic. When I told Nana you needed help, she had to talk them into it." "Convinced to help someone?" I asked. The venom wasn't intended for her, but she flinched and shrunk in on herself. "I wanted to, but we are always running. I don't know what we're running from, but whenever Nana says time to go, we go." She huffed a breath. "Did you go to school?" The sudden change of topic jarred me out of my grouchiness. "Sure, everyone does." "I don't," Patty said. "None of us have." "You don't? How do you learn stuff?" She shrugged. We have books, and the adults take turns teaching stuff, but it's more like doing chores. How to sew, drive, cook, clean." She broke eye contact and blushed. "How to have babies." I winced. "How old are you?" 8, she said, and shrugged. Dread settled in my gut. "How old will you be when they expect you to have kids?" "I don't know. Mom's age." Patty shrugged. "Mom said it won't be for a while. Danny hasn't had kids, and she's your age, I think. But it's clan duty. Someone from another clan has a kid with one of our clan, and that keeps the clan healthy." She wasn't making sense, and I was a little uncomfortable with the entire subject. I had paid little attention to anything or anyone since we'd left the O'Brien farm. I could have been traveling with a pack of murderous inbred cannibals. I decided I'd have to find out as soon as I could talk to the adults in private. Patty sat up. Do you like poems? Sure. I didn't. But her eyes lit up. Wait here. She hurried off at full speed, climbed into her mother's RV, and emerged with a flashlight headband and a thin book in her arms. This is my favorite. She sat on the tailgate and turned her light on. I read the cover. Edgar Allan Poe, huh? Isn't that advanced for a kid? No, Patty argued. It has pictures. I like this one. Fairyland. Why's that? She shrugged. I don't know. It's easy to read and I like it. What's it about? I ask. A forest at night, trees, a lake, and a big moon. She looked at me, then at the bonfire, and her voice dropped into a whisper again. I dream about it. I dreamed you were there. My brow furrowed. Dreamed? She nodded, then bounced in her seat and held the book out. I'll read it for you. I woke with a start. Lifeless gray light poured through the windows, promising to be another cold, damp day. My body ached from the chill, while my weary mind reeled from the mosaic of my life peeled open, if only for a few hours. It left me with a miserable sense of things better left forgotten, and the surety that helping the gallows was the right idea, even if it came back to bite me somehow. I dragged myself out of my sleeping bag, dressed in whatever clean clothes I had left, and considered where I could take a leak without being seen in the alley. You sleep out of your truck? I turned to see Ichiro emerge from the building, dressed in a white suit and dark red shirt. The gallows didn't have a shower, but he looked cleaner than I did. The cold didn't seem to bother him. It's what I have, I said. He scratched his neck. So you're a hobo. Great. I pulled on my hoodie and my denim jacket over that. I'm not a hobo. I'm a drifter. What's the difference? I own a vehicle. He smirked and shrugged it off. Not from here, then. Where are you from? Canadian. I hear the accent. You do not. I started cleaning the truck up a bit. Most of it was garbage anyway. I tossed it into a neighbor's bin. How did you cross the border? He asked. The hedge witches I ran with knew some tricks. They helped me get a fake ID from a local guy here in the city. Piotr something. Petrenko, Ichiro asked. You know him? We do. Calls himself a freelance gangster. Black market fixer. Lots of contacts in the city and overseas. Good for just about anything you need to buy. That's what I heard, I said. Figured he worked for someone big, though. He likes his freedom, Ichiro said. Yakuza tried to muscle in on him a few years ago, but the other factions pressured them to back off. It became an unspoken rule that Piotr was neutral. Yakuza, huh? My eyes darted to his hands, both of which were missing their pinkies. Your people? Nope, he said with a shrug. Don't think so. I guessed otherwise, but I didn't see a reason to pry. So if Piotr is so good, how come you guys haven't gone to him yourself? Hadn't occurred to us, Ichiro admitted. Deb doesn't like to involve the living, and they would recognize our faces in certain circles. Wonder what changed her mind. She hasn't yet, but you are a special case, being able to speak the Kododema. Never imagined magic was real, but we never imagined undeath was real either. How did you become a white, I asked. You mean Jikaninki? He shook his wrist, dangling 6 Japanese coins looped to a string of leather. We weren't gonna pay 6 mon to cross a river of snakes. I mulled it over. You ran away from the river of 3 crossings. He grinned, got away too, both of us. Both. He gestured to his left. Friend and I. He knew the way back. I looked at the empty air. You know, I've seen my share of spirits and ghosts. There's no one there. Ichiro's smile didn't waver. So you say. It occurred to me that, white, Jikaninki or otherwise, I could have been speaking to a crazy person, one who knew his way around cutlery, like his Yakuza ties. I let the subject drop. So where's Norton? I ask. From what I know about Piotr, he doesn't operate during the day. He'll be here. He's punctual. With the truck swept clean, I bagged up my dirty laundry. Did he duck out on that Suba too? Ichiro flashed his teeth. No, we aren't sure what hell awaited him, but he doesn't talk about it. Doesn't talk about anything but business. Probably smart, but we never were that bright. The back door to the false home opened, and Norton strode out. In the light of day, his military bearing was even more obvious, but he dressed like he was ready for an office internship. You are awake. Good. He looked over my truck and hesitated. If it's all the same with you, I have my own conveyance. And I will hold on to the cash for now. Where are we going? I glance at Ichiro. Pyotr Petrenko runs his market out of a truck he parks at the bottom of the Oakview parking garage. I think I remember the way, but we'll have to take the highway. I know the route, Ichiro said. Norton glanced at us both. Will we be expecting trouble? Pyotr isn't known for it, Ichiro said, so long as you don't owe him money. Ichiro gave simple directions as we crossed the city. We followed the river to the city's center, then turned south into a neighborhood I recognized, a place full of squat office buildings and storefronts that all had cages for their windows and doors. The parking garage had a toll booth, but the gate was open and the booth was empty. Ichiro stiffened as we entered the garage. His hand slipped into his jacket. He had a guard here. Kali something, I said. Kolesnik, Ichiro corrected. Either Pyotr has closed shop for the day, or something is wrong. I continued on to the bottom level of the garage. The area was almost empty, save for a stripped car frame sitting on cement blocks. It looked like it had been there for years. A big box truck sat in the center of the lot. Two men stood near the rear door, a tall guy who was all muscle and scowls and a shorter, sweatier man with a balding pate and maroon tracksuit. They were packing boxes into the truck. No problem, I said to Ichiro. I parked, stepped out of the truck, and approached with my hands at my sides, nice and neutral. We're closed, the shorter man said. He paused and did a double take. You. He was looking right at me. Yeah, I'm back. I hope you've got a few minutes. Pyotr spoke something to his big bodyguard in an East Slavic tongue, and the two of them approached. Sure, we've got a few minutes. The big one, Kolesnik, moved in and grabbed my collar. Before I could respond, he had me up against a concrete pillar with my feet dangling off the ground. I'm not a small person, so I wasn't used to anything smaller than a bull taking me off my feet. The sensation had me stunned long enough for Pyotr to draw a well-kept automatic and shake his head at Ichiro and Norton, who had stayed a few meters behind me. The fuck, I grunted. Kolesnik tightened his grip and gave me a shake. You've got balls, Pyotr growled. Despite looking like a phys ed teacher a few years short of retirement, his voice was cold steel. Do you think you can steal from me and show your face again? What? Kolesnik bounced me on the pillar again. Don't play dumb, Pyotr said. I want the money. I'm owed. Norton looked tense, like an attack dog ready to pounce, but didn't move. Ichiro looked bored. I doubted I could count on either of them to back me up. But I wasn't there to fight. We paid for my ID, I grunted. And took off with $3,000 in goods, Pyotr snarled. Should have known better than to trust a pack of gypsies. Well, I grunted. Gypsy ain't PC, Pete. Pyotr rolled his eyes. You have 2 seconds to cough up what you owe me, shitbird. I don't have your money, I said. Kolesnik's fingers squeezed around my throat, and I'm not with the Visitori. Pyotr frowned. I woke up yesterday morning, and they'd taken off. They didn't leave me a dime. Pyotr muttered something in his native tongue. Kolesnik patted me down and shook his head. Check the truck, I said, when I could breathe again. With a sigh, Pyotr stuffed the gun into his waistband. Goddamn thieves. 2 years they deal fair, and now they take off with everything they can carry. Where did they go? If I knew, I may have gone after them. I rubbed my neck and coughed. I came here to deal, not get my neck snapped. Pyotr muttered under his breath. Who are these two? More gypsies. He eyed Ichiro in particular. I wondered if he recognized him. No, I said. They're local. Just looking for some hard-to-get items. I told them you were the man to do it. Like what? Pyotr asked. Norton produced a crumpled slip of paper and handed it to Pyotr, who read it over at arm's length. You building a house? He laughed. Most of this is doable, but fiber optics at that length will need a few weeks. Maybe a month. We're willing to wait. Norton's tone was smooth and serious. I suspected that, like Ichiro, Pyotr wasn't the first guy he'd negotiated illicit goods with, provided the price is fair. Pyotr rubbed his flabby chin. That's the problem. 7,000 up front. Are you shitting me? I asked. Most of that shit isn't worth half that. The freelance gangster eyed me. I'm still owed 3 grand. Far as I'm concerned, if they're with you and you were with the gypsies, then I will have my debt repaid. Pay the money or get the fuck out of my sight. Norton and Ichiro exchanged looks. We'll take our business elsewhere then. Pyotr snorted. Start walking. A sinking feeling settled in my gut. Nothing was going the way I'd intended. I knew how things would play out, too. The Whites would tell Deb. Deb would decide I was a liability, and she'd either politely tell me to take my shitty business elsewhere or have her 2 goons drive me out. And I suspected Ichiro had something more dangerous than a sword tucked away in his jacket. But what could I do? I rubbed my eyes and returned to my truck. God damn it, Danny, I thought. Were you doing this to every fence we met, or is burning bridges the newest trend? And don't come back, Pyotr growled. His phone rang and he dug it out of his pocket. What is it? We're closed. Ichiro got ahead of me and turned. Don't bother following us. Best we part ways here. I clenched my teeth but said nothing. My best laid plans were circling the toilet. No, Pyotr growled into his phone. I told you last time, I don't do that business. Find someone else. He shook his head as he listened to his phone. No, get rid of it yourself. I didn't come to America to chop up bodies. Bodies. I turned around. Hey, wait. Kolesnik puffed his chest at me, but I ignored him. What's he want? Pyotr stared at me in confusion, then at his phone. They want a gravedigger, someone to dispose of a body. I don't do that. Yes, you do, I said. You need a gravedigger. I'm your guy. Pyotr looked me over. You want your money, and I want my buddies to get what they need. Let's work this out. He chewed his lip, then put his ear to the phone. Hold on. After muting it, he nodded to me. Go on. I shrugged. The people I ran with had to dispose of a body or 2. That was my job. I can make it vanish, without a trace. Yeah, how much money are we talking? Pyotr asked. I jumped on my knowledge of beef shares and did some crude math. $10 a pound, plus 500 for the scene cleanup. His eyebrows arched. You have your own kit? Of course. I didn't know what he meant, but I needed him on board. He tapped his chin. And what's my cut? I blinked. What was a good cut for a crook? 25%, Ichiro said behind me. I hadn't heard him approach. For a finder's fee. Pyotr pursed his lips. I don't know. First job I'll do pro bono, I said. In exchange, you get the full fee, and my buddies get a fair deal on the parts they want. That baited the hook. Pyotr tapped his phone. Still there. Give me the address. Someone will be down within the hour. Right. He stuck the phone in his pocket. See that? I put my neck out. Risks like that are bad business. So consider it a sign of my monumental generosity. But if you can't do the job, if you fuck this up, my cousin here will strap you to that piece of shit truck you have and drive it into the river. Acceptable. Good. Get going. They're waiting on 42nd and Cornerbrook. Look for a man with a white cap. I'm on it. I returned to my truck with Ichiro, and Norton was waiting for us. What are you doing? He asked. Negotiating, I said. You two head to your clubhouse. It'll be a few hours, but if you've got an icebox or something, fill it with snow and I'll be around with a solution to your rations problem. Norton took a step forward and put 2 fingers on my chest. This isn't what we agreed on. Deb would not approve. I stared at the hand. How many people were going to threaten me in one day? If you want things to happen, make them happen. I'll fetch this body, and you guys won't have to eat hospital waste. Piotr gets paid. You guys won't have to eat hospital waste. Piotr gets paid. You guys get the materials you need to not live like cockroaches. Everyone wins. Get me? There is too much risk, Norton said. I'm not asking you to come with me, I said. If I'm not back by sunset, then you know I got killed. End of story. He frowned and looked at Ichiro, who shrugged and smiled. After a moment to grind his teeth over it, Norton relented with a sigh. Whatever you do with the body, don't bring it to the gallows unless it's unrecognizable. No worries, I said. No one will see how the sausage gets made. Fine, we'll be waiting. He headed for his vehicle, a heavy rectangular town car that looked 20 years older than my truck, but was in much better condition. Good luck, Ichiro said. Cornerbrook isn't a friendly part of town. I can handle it, I said, then paused. Where's Cornerbrook anyway? 40 minutes later, and 20 minutes late, I found myself in a neighborhood of long-shuttered businesses in the southwest part of the city. No problem, I said, tapping my restless hands on the steering wheel. You've done your share of robbery for the visitory. Get in, grab the goods, and be a ghost in 5 minutes. Of course, I didn't have a clan of trained thieves to back me up and hurl all kinds of confounding magic at whatever tried to stop us. Cornerbrook was empty of cars, so it was easy to spot a young man in a baggy parka and a white baseball cap. He had more ink on his face than I had on my entire body, and he fixed me with a menacing glare as I parked. Piss off, he growled. Piotr sent me, I said. You wanted a digger. He looked me over, reassessing, but the glare didn't diminish. Park in the back. I'll tell Doc. I did as instructed, and another man, also covered in tattoos, waited to greet me. You better not be carrying, he said. He searched me, but I left the revolver stored under the driver's seat. This way. The building had been a diner at some point. The kitchen was too small to make anything but soup and sandwiches. Sloppy graffiti covered every wall. Footsteps paced upstairs. The second floor was a domicile that served as a gang hangout. The stale air stank of booze, pot, and acrid chemicals. Filthy couches and coffee tables, loaded with drug paraphernalia, dominated the living room, and the kitchen was a makeshift scorched drug lab. My first theory was that someone had overdosed, but the goon squad led me into a bedroom. The body of a square-jawed man lay on the floor in a blood-stained gray jacket. Even in death, he looked far more dangerous than the kids with notebook scribblings all over their faces. Pacing the floor next to him was a tall, lean white kid. His exaggerated footsteps were the forced swagger gang members put on to show their fearlessness. He couldn't stand still. The fuck is this? He snarled. Piotr's digger, the gangster from the front door, said. The leader stalked forward, stepping over the body. You don't look like nothing. He had a stubby automatic in his hand, and he waved it over me like he was scanning for a barcode. I ask for a digger, and he sends me some homeless fuck. What are you, working for crack? Tired of blowing Piotr's bodyguard for your hit? He uttered a toothy, nervous laugh. My stomach and my teeth were already on edge considering where I was, what I was doing, and that chuckle's pointing a gun at me. A fair portion of my logic center was scolding me for my rash decisions, and how I had led myself into a situation that could get me killed. But I tossed that buffet of doubt and fear aside. Ever since Danica had walked out, it was like everyone was taking a swing at me, like they knew I was the loner from the herd and would be easy pickings. But I was no one's prey. I'd killed things 20 times worse than the tattooed douchebag in front of me with his little pop gun. You want this job done? I ask. Or do we whip him out and compare size next? His smile faded. I could see the tension in his eyes. The contest of wills between a man who was used to bullying people without repercussion and his fear of someone who refuses to cower. I pushed my luck, drawing up my magic, recharged despite a restless sleep. I exhaled raw, necrotic fear into the air. It brushed against his willpower and seeped into the cracks. He made an odd noise as he shuddered. "You're a little man in a big world," I thought. "Sit down." "Dog, what you thinking, man?" the front doorman asked. Yeah, let me think." The nerves throbbed on Dog's temple, and he rubbed the tension with the tip of his gun. "All right, here's the score. You get this boy out of here. You clean the blood out of the floor. I don't want anyone who comes by to even think this fucker was here. You don't ask questions, and we're square. Understood?" I tilted my head and looked at the corpse. 6 feet, maybe 200. Big boy. I doubt you boys have working plumbing, so I'll have to take it somewhere else for disposal. 2,500, paid when this place is clean. He tensed. 2K? "A bargain at twice the price," I said. Dog had stopped rubbing his temple with the gun. Instead, he scratched his jaw with it. His finger was in the trigger guard and everything. Bluster was the only requirement for gang material anymore. "How come Piotr didn't want to take the job?" he asked. "Did he know this ice was Russian?" I hesitated. A bullshit answer would arouse more suspicion, so I went with the truth. "He's a shopkeeper, not a janitor. Now go take a hike. I need privacy." "What, you gonna bang it first?" Dog asked. His balls were growing back now that the spell was wearing off. "I need you and your friends out of the way so I don't have to clean it twice," I said. "Or do you want to add another 500 to the tab? You can giggle and shit yourselves all you want." Dog growled, but he licked his teeth and nodded to the others. "Surge, beat, let's go. This clown gets 1 hour, or we add him to the pile." I rolled my eyes. Beat stomped his way downstairs, but Surge, the goon who had met me at the back door, stared at me for a moment longer before following his buddies. Dog, Beat, and Surge, I thought. Either these guys are henchmen for a DJ-themed supervillain, or crime needs to vet its applicants better. I wondered how bad the city's crime problem was, that a pack of high school dropouts could already have 1 murder on their hands, along with the drugs and God knew what else. The corpse didn't look local. Something about the thick jawline reminded me of Kolisnik. Dog said he was Russian. I checked his pockets, but Dog must have stripped him of any valuables. I had a few options for getting rid of the body. I knew a spell. One I'd attempted when Nana Valerie had revealed necromancy was my brand. When the Visitatori and I were camping in northeastern Quebec over the summer, I had walked to a nearby park late one evening, sat an apple core on a picnic table, and tried to make it rot away with my magic. The apple rotted all right, and desiccated into some kind of ashen powder, but without the smell. Then, because I didn't know what I was doing, the magic had rotted through most of the picnic table and left a sizable black patch on the dead grass under it. I hadn't used it much since, save when I needed to get rid of my garbage. The spell didn't work on anything living or inorganic like rocks or plastic, but it worked very well on dead stuff. The spell would work for a cleanup, but I didn't want the body dissolved. It was a potential source of meat for the Gallows, and could convince Deb I was worth keeping around. I'd need to take it somewhere and chop it up. Chop it up, I thought. Listen to yourself. You're talking about defiling a human body. That was a person. True, but it was a dead person. And being a necromancer, I knew when a body was just a husk, void of a soul. A pile of flesh, blood, and bone that a community of whites would need to keep the hunger pangs at bay. A grisly sort of sustenance for a grim, cursed existence. So I'd have to be a butcher. The where and how of that would have to come later. I focused on the present and tried lifting the body. 4 years on the O'Brien cattle farm had made heavy labor second nature, and the Visitatori, for all their magic, were always glad to have a strong back around. Of course, I'd never lifted a dead body before. The weight of it shifted with every motion. making it twice as hard to lift as something that was solid. I got it over my shoulders in a firefighter's carry, a trick I'd learned in high school gym class. But with its legs and arms splayed out in every direction, it was like the body was fighting me. With a grunt, I got to my feet and was doing the calculations for carrying it down the narrow stairwell when I noticed the man standing in the doorway. It was the gang member Dog had identified as Surge. I'd barely taken in any details about him, aside from the goofy gang fashions and youthful swagger, but something about him had changed. His posture was taller, and he'd pulled up his pants so he looked less like a tattooed hand puppet. I asked for privacy. I growled. I could feel tacky, cold blood staining my neck. Surge reached into his pocket and produced a sidearm. Not the worn-out street piece Dog used. Surge's was bigger, better maintained, and he didn't bother to pick his nose with it. "Don't move," he ordered. He aimed it at my chest, and I went still. Never taking his eyes off me, he reached into his coat for a cell phone. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Surge grunted laughter. "You're dead. That's what's going on. Dog signed his death warrant. See, that ice you got is Maxim Breskov with the Katorga Bratstvo. And they answered blood for blood. That means you, Dog, and that shithead Beat are all gonna get skinned alive." "Hold on," I said. "I'm freelance. Pyotr didn't take corpses," Surge interrupted. "At least until today. If he had kept his nose out of it like he should have, it would have been fine. But now he'll be on the Bratsko's shit list, and so are you." His camera flashed as he took a picture of me holding the corpse. Then he started typing, putting a text in. I had seconds to act before Surge texted his Russian buddies with all the evidence they needed to hunt me down, not to mention Pyotr, who wouldn't see it coming. But when I shifted my foot, Surge looked my way and aimed the gun between my eyes. "Adios, gravedigger," he grinned. There was a loud clap. Surge went cross-eyed and dropped dead. Ichiro appeared behind him with a smoking, silenced pistol. "You," I stammered. "Us." Ichiro knelt and retrieved the phone. Close one. He was one button away from mailing your face to the Bratstvo. They are very bad news. You followed me. Norton and I figured you would need a shadow. You may be a wizard, but you're green as they come. The dead Russian was still oozing old blood onto me. Thanks. I could have ducked out of town, but Pyotr wouldn't have seen them coming." Ichiro looked at me, then stepped over Surge and approached. "Pyotr dead would settle your debt. If I wanted to run out on my debt, I would have." He shrugged, then tilted his head as if listening to something. "Show his boss the phone and make sure he knows what it means, or he'll shoot you. When you get the bodies downstairs, take the truck east and then north at the Green Rocket coffee shop. You'll know it. Follow the road all the way to Howers. It's an abandoned hospital. You can try your home butchery there." He tucked the phone into my jacket pocket and then was out the door, fast and silent as a ghost's shadow. "You could have offered to carry one of these," I said to the empty room. By the time Dog and Beat returned, I had stuffed the Russian and Surge into my truck, then covered them with my sleeping bag and dirty laundry. Blood stained my jacket, so I swapped it for my hoodie. I had scoured the room clean of blood and collected the brass casing from Ichiro's bullet. I showed Dog the phone, explained the situation with the same careful wording I'd used to teach math to Patty Visitore. Then I showed him Surge's body. He wasn't happy, but to my relief, he directed that anger at Surge. When he learned the Bratstvo wouldn't be gunning for his blood, he was practically on the moon with relief. So I seized on his good mood and asked for an extra $1,000 to get rid of Surge. With the bodies and the money, I was riding high. I followed Ichiro's route, turned north at the coffee shop with its green, phallic-shaped rocket, and only stopped when I spotted a hardware store on the way. The extra cash was burning a hole in my pocket, so I parked in an out-of-the-way spot and ran inside to get some tools. It was almost noon when I reached Howers. The dilapidated building was older than I was. and graffiti-covered faded brown bricks scorched by fire. Someone had erected a chain-link fence around the perimeter, with broken condemned signs and other warnings against trespassing. Ichiro leaned against the fence, unaffected by the cold weather. As I pulled up, he climbed into the passenger's seat, glanced at the bodies stashed in the rear view, and smirked. "There's an alley ahead. Take it, and then next right. Norton is waiting for us." I didn't enjoy involving the whites, but Ichiro had saved my bacon, so I didn't question his continued help. The alley led to a rear entrance meant for some kind of cargo deliveries. Norton had parked his brick of a car out of sight from the street, and I parked beside him. "This is already more costly than we agreed," he said. I held up my hands. "I didn't ask you to come with me." "If we hadn't, you'd likely be dead now," Norton said. "Wouldn't be the first time. Now, you can either help me unload or you can sit there and scowl. But I've had my fill of people giving me shit. Situations change. We adapt. No sense whining about it." Ichiro chuckled to himself and opened the truck. He examined the tools I had bought, including a hacksaw, a set of kitchen knives, some big picnic coolers, and a few metal buckets. "Have you ever done this before?" "Sure," I said. "I worked on a cattle farm for a few years." "You butchered meat on the farm?" Norton asked. "No, of course not. But the head of the house went hunting every September. I learned my way around a deer." The big African grabbed my shoulder. "These are men. They are not deer." I glanced at his hand. They were men. Bad ones, from the sound of it. Now they're corpses. They lived by the sword and died accordingly. Now whether they wind up in a casket or the river is irrelevant to me. But these bodies are more than you would see in a year. Properly stored, you won't have to risk yourself in a hospital for a long time. Isn't that a better use of them? "They could be drug users," Ichiro said. "Can't eat tainted meat." I looked at him. "Do drugs affect you?" He shrugged. "If they're consumed, sure. Heart doesn't beat. Lungs don't matter, but the stomach still works. There is a morgue inside. We can work in privacy there." "How do you know?" I asked. "We used to hide out here," he said, "after we crawled out of the river. This place has ties to the other side." "The locals think it's haunted," Norton added. I shrugged. "Don't see why that should bother us. Who's carrying who?" "We shall carry the tools," Norton said. "You want to impress us, you can carry the bodies." With a frown, I grabbed for Serda's corpse. I didn't think this was a popularity contest. I carried the two bodies, one in each arm, as far as the interior of the hospital, but it was putting too much strain on my back. I dropped the Russian and dragged him along by his feet while Serge hung off my shoulders like a scarf. As we walked deeper into the darkened hospital, I felt a sense of comfort that clashed with the tragic condition of the building, an energy that was kin to my own. I traced the flow of it to an empty room and spotted a face staring at me. It was a child, draped in a hospital gown, with tousled blonde hair and two big empty black pits for eyes. Holy shit. "What?" Norton asked. "Did you see a rat?" "Right there." I pointed at the door. "Do you see her?" Norton chuckled. "Are you seeing ghosts now, Magic Man?" Yes. My eyes drifted around the hallways of the hospital. More figures, most too short to be adults, were emerging from the shadows and forgotten corners of ours. A lot of them. The little blonde girl approached us, walking a few inches above the ground. "Are you a doctor?" Her words sounded in my head, flat and emotionless. Norton didn't react, but Ichiro gave me a knowing nod. The hospital caught fire in the 70s. He glanced to his left. "No, he's already led them across. These are echoes, memories, dreams." "Hello," I said to the ghost child. "Are you a doctor?" she asked again in the same empty voice. "Like a skipping record," I noted. "They won't give us trouble," Ichiro assured us, "but don't rouse their grudges. Anger and fear will drive them to become angry and fearful. It allows them to interact with the physical world." Like a poltergeist, I ask. He shrugged. They are sponges for emotional energy. Normally they feel nothing, but they will remember the emotions they sense from the living. Best to be calm. Are you a doctor? The ghost asked. I sighed. Let's get this done. The morgue was a gloomy setup, cold and lightless. The air stank of old chemicals and blood. There was only a single mortuary table left, a big slab of metal with a rim to keep liquids from spilling everywhere. I hung a few camping lanterns I'd bought from the hardware store and got them lit. It turned the pitch-black room to something out of a horror film, but I could see what I was doing. I set Serge on the table, then awkwardly stripped him out of his coat and shirt. I know enough about spotting needle marks, I said, but what else should I be looking for? Skin popping, Norton said. Circular scars on the skin. Check the inside of the elbows, necks between the fingers and toes. Some users like to hide their injection points, Ichiro added, even in the genitals. I gave him a look, and he offered his usual shrug. Norton's face pinched into a smile. No time to get squeamish now, I thought. I stripped Serge down. He had not been skimping on the protein. I checked him over for marks, but he appeared to be healthy, save for the expensive tattoos. Looks clean, I said. You gonna help, or are you gonna sit there and watch? The two whites exchanged looks and said nothing. Then give me some room. I stripped out of my jacket and donned a pair of yellow kitchen gloves. Then I took up a knife and ran the blade over Serge's stomach, deep enough to cut through the abdominal wall, and turned him over. Unlike the deer, the torso didn't release the insides. I set the knife aside and went digging. What are you doing? Norton asked. His eyes were wide and white. Gotta get rid of the soft meats, I said. The organs, unless you guys eat them. For all their bluster, the whites looked uncomfortable as I pulled lengths of still, warm intestine into the metal bucket at my feet. Blood was getting everywhere, but I hadn't thought to buy anything but rubber kitchen gloves for the task. Get an apron next time, I noted to myself. When they didn't answer, I pulled the guts into the bucket and sliced them away from the body at both ends. I stirred the pot with my necromancy, and the guts dried like old pasta before they crumbled into ash. See that? No sweat. I worked the body as if it were a deer, with the digestive tract gone. I went to remove the extremities and head. My new hacksaw took off Serge's noggin, but couldn't do the same for the hands and feet. By then, Norton had excused himself from the room, so Ichiro produced his wakizashi from somewhere and offered it to me. I stared at it, then at my blood-soaked hands. You better do it. He took a long breath and lopped the limbs off at the wrist and ankles. In our homeland, this work is kagare. Touching blood and dead flesh is a stain on the soul. Undertakers, butchers. Your family's kami must be filthy. I stained any spirit willing to follow me around before I was born, I muttered. So what next? You gonna debone him? Ichiro asked with a snort. It occurred to me that the steps I was following weren't necessary, that I could simply take the flesh from the areas of the body that had meat to offer. But I stuck myself in the routine I'd learned, and I wasn't sure I could decay an entire body at once. Better to do it in pieces. I should have bought a better saw, I said, but no, the skin comes next. Then, whatever he's got for meat, back, shoulders, legs, arms, the rest gets dissolved. He swallowed. Skin? You don't want to chew through that, I told him. Do you? Ichiro's eyes darted over Serge's dismembered body. He flicked his wakizashi clean. We think we'll go find Norton and try not to think about it. The flensing knife did its work, but as I peeled away skin and exposed the red muscle and fat underneath, it looked familiar. I tried to push the thoughts from my head, but they kept flaring up every time I looked at the bare pectorals or the jagged stump of the neck. Went into the garage looking for the RV and found the bodies hanging from hooks, skinned and salted. Serge's body convulsed. I jumped and watched the exposed muscle flex and shiver. The fuck? I tried to still the body, and it clubbed me with one of its arms. The reaction was defensive, almost alive. I pinned the body with both hands and looked for something to stop the thrashing. My eyes fell on the bucket where Surge's head sat on a pile of discarded appendages and desiccated guts. The eyes were rolling around in its head, and its mouth and tongue worked as if it were trying to speak. What the hell was happening? The body shuddered on the table, legs and arms spread wide, the spine wrenched and cracked without the abdominal muscles to anchor it. One arm struck the edge of the table so hard the elbow dislocated. Blood and viscera splashed everywhere. "Help!" I shouted. "Fuck's sake, someone get in here." Ichiro and Norton emerged from the hallway, and their eyes went aghast. "What are you doing?" Norton asked. "It's doing something." Ichiro's wakizashi appeared from his coat. "Hold it." "I'm trying," I said, all but lying on top of the torso to hold it in place. Norton grabbed the broken arm, grimacing as he did. He pulled the limb taut, and Ichiro took it off at the elbow. They got the left leg off at the knee, but then the Russian's body rose and grabbed Norton. "Stop this," he shouted. "I'm not doing it," I protested. "You are the Necromancer," Ichiro said. He aimed for the Russian's ankles, severing the tendons, but the corpse had a death grip on Norton. I looked around for something, anything to stop the reanimation. The blonde ghost child appeared in the doorway, and about a dozen other ghosts had gathered with her. They drifted into the room surrounding the mortuary slab. What was happening? Some kind of residual magic in Howers. Was it the ghosts? The corpse beneath me wasn't Surge's. It was a woman's, her head torn off at the shoulders. The blood almost glowed on her snow-white skin. I tore myself away from it with a scream. The children's faces warped and shifted, masks of anger, fear, horror, and despair. Lanterns flickered above me, creating movement in every shadow. The walls rattled, and the air became so cold I could see my breath. The reanimated Russian hurled the 6'5" Norton like he was a feather pillow and swung a fist at Ichiro, who fended it off with his blade and swift footwork. "Calm yourself," he barked. "The spirits are reacting to you." I blinked, confused. Images flashed all about me, memories that were and weren't my own. A conflagration as Howers burned, the screams of children through smoke-cooked throats amidst the sounds of alarms and panic. Gunshots rang out. Screams came from the basement. Liam O'Brien shouted for his children. The farmhouse was on fire. Things at the windows, smashing in the glass, howls and claws. She screamed as they dragged her away. The body on the table was hers, and then it wasn't. It was a thing of muscle, fur, and hide, a snarling face of piercing yellow eyes and bloody fangs. It was afraid. It had come looking for prey, but it had found me. I screamed as I impaled its chest with the kitchen knife, roared all my hate, grief, and fury into its dying face as I stabbed it again and again, tearing organs and muscle, its blood staining my skin forever with its mark. "Alex," the shout startled me out of my rage. My vision took in a kaleidoscope of sensations, but the voice had come from somewhere outside of the mental bombardment. "Patty," I thought. No voice responded. I gave my head a shake and clenched my eyes shut, trying to drown out all the chaos. I thought about Patty Visitori, bright-eyed, freckled, milky jade eyes, and a little gap in her front teeth, dressed in a boy's hand-me-downs because she hadn't grown into Danica's stuff yet, the delight in her eyes as she watched a caterpillar wriggle its way across a branch, reading Poe together on the tailgate of my truck. Her presence had been a comfort in the worst period of my life. The Visitori had been a family when I had nothing, but they left me on the side of the road over a lie Valerie instructed me to keep. Was it any wonder I felt so damn lost? "I'm sorry, kid," I thought. "I can't handle it. Not yet." Steadying my breath, I held the pain below the surface until the waters stilled. The last of the chaos blew out in a cloud of fog. The mortuary was still. The ghostly children had departed, and the corpses were lifeless again. Norton and Aikiro tossed the mutilated Russian aside, bearing more than a few bruises and scrapes. "What the hell was that?" Norton snapped. Serge's torso was a bloody pulp. I considered the bent and broken kitchen knife in my fist. "Sorry," I sighed. "Long day." The rest of the butchery went by in silence. The two whites said nothing, but their faces told me what was on their mind. I put that aside and completed my work with a detached professionalism, then packed away about 100 pounds of human flesh into 2 coolers. I didn't have the tools to take anything but the easiest slabs of muscle. The rest I decayed with my magic. The work took the rest of the day to complete. I was starving, exhausted, drained of my magic, and haunted by the issues closed off in my noggin. They were still struggling to get free, and I had to think with methodical slowness so they wouldn't catch me unawares. We emerged from Howard's and packed the coolers into my truck. Blood soaked my clothes, so I swapped into some 4-day-old jeans and a t-shirt that smelled like Danica's cigarettes. I bottled the fresh mental pain with the rest. With me in the middle and Norton in the rear, we carried the 2 coolers into the bowels of the city. Provided they replaced the ice packs inside, the meat would last them a while, until they could get their hands on the freezer Pieter had sold them. Deb waited for us inside the entrance to the Gallows. Her eyes widened as she saw our cargo. "What is all this?" I left Ichiro and Norton to speak with her in hushed tones as I found a spot in the corner of the Gallows cistern to stash the coolers. I hovered near them, letting the whites discuss the day's events. It wasn't hard to imagine what was going through their minds. Between the trouble with Piotr, the underdogs, and my own magical outburst, they had to assume they were dealing with a recklessly dangerous idiot. The other whites emerged from their hiding places in the Gallows. The 4 frat boys, the frazzle-haired electrician, and the biker-looking type with the breathless voice. They gathered around Deb to get the story, and I turned to avoid looking at them. It wasn't a total loss. Piotr would get some of his money. I hadn't gotten shot, and I had a few $100 to hold on to. It would be enough to do some laundry, get something to eat, fill up the truck. Decide what happened next. I rubbed my temples. The answer still hadn't come to me. Maybe it never would, but that was okay. It was okay. Deb approached, flanked by her 2 heavies. The other whites withdrew, though they watched me with a wary eye. "Well, Alex," she put a hand over her collarbone, "it sounds like you had a very interesting day." "Not bad for a first-timer," I said. The smile she offered was sad. "I am not happy with how it turned out. I can forgive some factors that were outside of your ability to predict, but you took chances with my people that put them and us at risk. It was only sheer luck you came out of it alive at all." She lowered her hand and straightened her shoulders. "I'm afraid I simply can't allow this kind of risk. However closed off it makes us, it's preferable to the alternative." I met her eyes. "I understand. Thank you for being honest." "I know life has not been kind to you lately," she said, "and I sympathize. Believe me. But we can't be bringing one another's troubles into each other's lives right now. It wouldn't be safe for them, or for you." Even knowing it was coming, it still stung. Fair enough. The urge hit me to put as much distance between myself and the Gallows as possible. Take care of each other then. She averted her gaze. They always did. I headed for the door. As I did, a pair of whites emerged from the dark. One was the short Latin American I'd seen the day previous, with the Hawaiian shirt. With him was a slender woman in a frumpy sweater and ankle-length skirt. I combed my memories and recalled the names, Miguel and Jimena, from an earlier conversation with Deb. "Deb," the young man called. "We gotta talk. That asshole Max ate everything we had left." "That's a lie." The angry-looking redhead from the frat boy group closed his hands into fists and stormed forward. "I only took my share." "Jimena didn't get any," Miguel growled. "Neither of us did." I haven't eaten in weeks, Max said. You two barely leave your room. What do you need it for? We're supposed to share it, not pass it out to the dickhead who keeps sneaking out, Miguel argued. We didn't go anywhere. One of the bigger frat boys, Donnie, joined Max's side. You have been sneaking out, Norton asked. Soon everyone in the cistern was shouting again. I considered intervening again, but it hadn't endeared me to them the first time, and it was none of my business. If the Gallows wanted to eat themselves alive, that was their choice. My eyes fell on the girl, Jimena, all but forgotten. She shook like a reed and held gnarled hands to her ears. Something about her reminded me of Nana Valerie. Deb had mentioned her anxiety troubles. I slowed my pace, then turned and circled the confrontation. I hadn't wrapped the flesh up in anything, so I grabbed a strip of muscle. Jimena turned her head as I approached, hyper-aware of her surroundings in her state of panic. I held out the offering, but she let out a whimper and skittered out of reach. I saw a gaunt, scarred face under her wig, one eye reduced to a milky white orb. I'm sorry, I said. I wanted to say we have some. Well, we have this. You don't have to go hungry. Jimena's left eye, the one she didn't self-consciously cover with her wig, was big and brown. From the angle of her cheekbones, I suspected she had once been beautiful. Did you hurt them? She asked. I shook my head. No, it was true, even if it wasn't the entire story. Her healthy eye darted from me to the offering of flesh. With a shuffle of her feet, she got close enough to take it at arm's length. You're Jimena, right? I asked. It's nice to meet you. She blinked and nodded, her eyes welling with black tears. Thank you. Then she scurried away into the dark, the way she and her brother had come. I noticed the rest of the Gallows had fallen silent, watching me. What? Well, damn. Miguel scratched his head at me, then headed off after his sister. She was hungry, I said. There's enough here now. However long it lasts is up to you. No one reacted. I frowned and was halfway out the door when Deb cleared her throat. Alex, a moment. I hesitated, but turned to face her. I feel we've both gotten off on the wrong foot, she said. I can't guess at the troubles on your mind, and I may have allowed Norton and Ichiro's description of your day to paint you a dramatic shade of gray. I don't like drama. I like quiet, if there is such a thing. She bowed her head. Jimena has always been an excellent judge of character, but I want you to understand how surprising it is for her to open up to anyone who isn't her brother. Her eyes turned to the coolers, the promise of months without having to risk themselves robbing from hospitals or pilfering graves. Not many people would offer courtesy to us. Hogged by whites, the damned. She gave a sad laugh. Whatever you want to call us. People, Deb. Your people. I looked off the direction Jimena had departed. Someone younger than Mena took a chance to reach out to me when I was in a bad way. I tried not to think about where I would be if she hadn't been around when I needed her. Her expression warmed. I want to recant what I said. I would like you to stay if you're willing. I glanced at the other whites lurking about the cistern. That's kind of you, but I think I need to find my own footing before I take up that task of anchoring everyone else. Her smile wavered, but she nodded. If you feel that would be wisest. I suppose we haven't given the best impression of ourselves either. But I'll be around, I said. This city has some interesting shadows. I'll find one for myself. We'll figure out a way to get in contact. If you need anything, I'll see what I can do. How long has it been, having friendly neighbors? Feels like it was 2 lifetimes ago. It would be good to have someone out there watching out for us. Same, I agreed. Hold on before you go. Deb went to her room and emerged a minute later holding a leather-bound book. If you are sticking around, I think Mr. Lindquist would be glad to know someone like yourself had this on hand. I flipped open the book, finding it filled edge to edge with notes and sketches. The paper was old, brittle, so I held it closed. What is it? A journal, one of the few that Mr. Lindquist left behind. It details all he had learned about our condition. I left the Gallows with a renewed sense of purpose, friends, and an opportunity to learn more about my world, about necromancy. Those were the sort of gifts most people don't appreciate, either in the giving or receiving. As I pulled up to the Oakview parking garage, I spotted Kalisnik stuffed into the toll booth. He sneered, eager to continue our tussle. "Open up," I told him. "Your cousin wants his money." His brow furrowed, but he opened the gate. "Don't make me come find you." I smirked and drove on, descending to the bottom level. Piotr was waving goodbye to a swanky sports car that passed me on the way out, and his eyes went wide when he recognized me. "Another satisfied customer?" I asked after I'd parked and approached on foot. He grunted.
"Money?"
"You're a charmer," I said, and handed over a fat wad of bills with a bit of reluctance. "Mom." He licked a thumb and started flipping through it. "Dog says you helped him with a problem." "The body was Russian," I said. "One of Dog's own people was going to rat him out. I had to take care of it." His eyebrows perked up as he counted. "Did you charge him for the trouble?" "Yeah," I said. "Tossed an extra $1,000 to get rid of the second body." Piotr wagged the bills. "Why is there only $250 here then?" "That's what we agreed on, and a sizable chunk of what the Visitori owed you. I'll get you the rest, and more, but I need something to keep me afloat in the meantime." "You assume I want to hire a gravedigger?" "It's money in the bank, and all you gotta do is point me to them," I said. "I have my own disposal methods. The bodies are powder now." He smacked the money against his palm and stuck it in his pocket. "You know, I expected you to run. Cousin was eager to chase you down, too. But this has me in a good mood. Perhaps we can work out something, but I don't get disposal requests every day. You'll have to find a day job." "That's my next step," I said, "in a place where I can work in privacy." He rubbed his jaw. "A landlord on Sutcliffe Street rents homes to college kids. He says one of his properties is cursed. Haunted. No one stays a full year. Not many neighbors." I smirked. "Haunted, huh?" He shrugged. "People will believe anything. Don't tell him I sent you, but he should give you a fair price. I set him up with some TVs last year, so I know he'll take cash." "I'll look him up," I promised. "Thanks, Piotr. I won't let you down." "Be sure you don't." He grinned. "Wait here a moment. I'll grab you a burner phone. If I have any jobs, I'll call you on it, so don't leave it uncharged." I took the phone and shook his hand when he offered it. "After the day I've had, I bet you call before the end of the week." He snorted. "It's quieter than you think. The trick is to avoid looking for trouble." Guess we'll see how long I can manage that. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to the channel. Then check out the Necromancer AF series by MG Gallows on Amazon via the link below. Thanks again for listening. Stay cool and keep reading.